My wife earned top salesperson at her father's company. At dinner, she humiliated me. How does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing? Everyone laughed. Don't be mad. I'm just teasing. I replied, teasing is fun. Want to hear mine? I own 77% of your company, and now you're fired. You ever been roasted alive at your own dinner table while wearing a suit that costs more than some people's monthly rent? Yeah, welcome to my Tuesday night. There I was, sitting in a $1,200 Tom Ford suit that fit like a dream, holding a glass of champagne that tasted like it came from a box with a spout, watching my wife Isabel bask in the glow of her latest achievement like she'd just discovered fire or invented the wheel or something equally groundbreaking. Spoiler alert, she'd hit a sales quota. Groundbreaking stuff, really. Call Stockholm. Someone deserves a prize. The Redwood Steakhouse was the kind of place where the waiters looked at you with thinly veiled judgment if you ordered your steak well done, and the lighting was so dim you needed a flashlight to read the menu. Everything screamed, I have money and I need you to know it. From the gold-trimmed plates to the chandelier that probably cost more than a kidney on the black market. Isabel had insisted we celebrate here because apparently, hitting your sales target at Daddy's company required the same level of fanfare as winning an Oscar or curing a disease. Isn't this amazing? Isabel practically squealed, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz music that was trying way too hard to be sophisticated. She was glowing, and I don't mean in that cute, I'm proud of myself way. I mean in that everyone needs to acknowledge my greatness immediately, or I might actually combust way. Her blonde hair was styled in those perfect waves that probably required a small army of professionals and enough hairspray to punch another hole in the ozone layer. Her dress was designer. I knew because she'd mentioned the brand approximately 47 times while getting ready. The table was packed with all the usual suspects. Her father, Gerald Kenton, sat at the head like some kind of corporate king, his receding hairline glistening under the chandelier lights. He had that look that successful middle-aged white guys always have. The one that says, I peaked in the 80s and I'm still dining out on those glory days. Next to him sat Monica from accounting, whose entire personality consisted of agreeing with whatever Isabel said, and Trevor from marketing, who had the annoying habit of clapping at inappropriate moments like he was perpetually stuck at a pep rally. Miles. Isabel grabbed my arm with the kind of grip that suggested affection but felt more like a vice. Did you hear what Daddy just said? They're considering me for regional director. That's wonderful, honey, I said, taking a sip of the disappointing champagne. I wondered if expensive restaurants did this on purpose. Serve garbage alcohol so you'd appreciate the overpriced food more by comparison. Some kind of psychological warfare disguised as fine dining. Considering? Gerald boomed, his voice carrying that particular authority that comes from never being told no. She's already got it in the bag. My daughter, the youngest regional director in Kenton Holdings history. He raised his glass, and everyone else scrambled to do the same like some kind of coordinated flash mob. Trevor started clapping. Of course he did. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the supportive husband while mentally calculating how much this dinner was going to cost, and whether the stakes would at least be worth the inevitable heartburn. Isabel launched into a detailed explanation of her latest sales strategy, using words like synergy and paradigm shift with the confidence of someone who'd watched one too many TED Talks. Her colleagues hung on every word like she was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of describing how she'd convinced some clients to sign contracts they probably didn't need. The key, she said, gesturing with her champagne glass in a way that made me nervous about potential spillage, is understanding the client's pain points and positioning yourself as the solution. It's not rocket science, but not everyone has the natural talent for it. She shot me a look. That look, the one that said, unlike some people at this table who do nothing all day. I'd seen that look before. Hell, I'd seen it so many times I could probably paint it from memory at this point. Miles, you must be so proud, Monica chimed in, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my teeth hurt. Having such a successful wife. Oh, I'm drowning in pride, I said deadpan. Seriously considering building a shrine. Isabel laughed, but it had an edge to it. He jokes, but really, Miles has been so supportive while I've been climbing the ladder. Haven't you, babe? The thing about loaded questions is that they're like landmines wrapped in pretty paper. There was no right answer here. Agree to enthusiastically, and you look desperate. Disagree, and you're the bad guy. So I did what I'd learned to do over 3 years of marriage to Isabel Kinnan. I smiled and said something vague. I do what I can. Which is what exactly? This came from Bryce, one of Isabel's colleagues from the sales department. He had that cocky smirk that screamed, I drive a leased BMW and think I'm hot stuff. I mean, no offense, man, but what do you actually do? The table got quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, but that awful tension-filled silence where everyone's suddenly very interested in their water glasses and the pattern on their napkins. Isabel jumped in before I could answer. Miles does freelance work. Tech stuff, mostly. It's very flexible. Flexible. That was her favorite word for unemployed. Never mind that I'd sold a software company for enough money to buy a small island. Never mind that I had more in my investment portfolio than most of these people would see in their lifetimes. To Isabel and her father's circle, if you weren't grinding away in some corporate hellscape with a title and a corner office, you weren't actually working. Tech stuff, Gerald repeated, his tone suggesting I'd just admitted to being a professional nose-picker. Well, that's nice. Trevor clapped again. I was starting to think he had a neurological condition. The food arrived, overpriced cuts of meat that were admittedly cooked to perfection, though I'd never give this place the satisfaction of admitting it out loud. Isabel continued holding court, regaling everyone with tales of her professional conquests while I focused on my steak and wondered if this was what purgatory felt like. Expensive, uncomfortable, and full of people who thought disruption was a personality trait. Then came dessert, and with it, the moment that would change everything. Isabel stood up, champagne glass in hand, her face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. I want to make a toast, she announced, and everyone immediately shut up and turned to look at her like she was about to announce the second coming. To strong women who lift men up, by showing them how it's done. The table erupted in laughter. Gerald practically choked on his scotch. He was laughing so hard. Monica clapped along with Trevor this time, creating a horrible symphony of enabling behavior. Then Isabel turned to me, her eyes glinting with that particular brand of malice that people mistake for playfulness. So, Miles, tell everyone, how does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing all day? The table leaned in, waiting for my response like spectators at a Roman gladiator match. Some looked uncomfortable, but most were barely hiding their amusement. This was entertainment for them, the successful woman and her underachieving husband, a modern comedy. Let me paint you a picture of my life before that glorious dinner where I metaphorically set fire to my wife's ego. Around Kinnan Holdings, I was basically invisible. Not in a cool superhero way, but in that sad who invited this guy way that makes you question your life choices. I was known as Isabel's plus one. The husband who showed up to company events wearing nice clothes and a polite smile, nodding along while people talked about quarterly earnings and market penetration like it was the most riveting conversation since sliced bread learned to talk. Oh, you're Isabel's husband, they'd say, as if that was my entire identity. As if I'd been born fully formed from her rib cage or something, existing solely to be her accessory, her arm candy, her proof that even successful women can settle for men who apparently do nothing all day. The thing is, doing nothing is actually really hard when you're secretly running the entire operation from behind a curtain like some kind of financial Wizard of Oz. But I'm getting ahead of myself. See, while everyone at Kinnan Holdings was busy treating me like I was some kind of kept man who spent his days playing video games in his underwear and living off his wife's success, I was actually the majority shareholder of the entire company. Yeah, you read that right. 77% ownership. I own more of Kinnan Holdings than Gerald Kinnan himself owned, which was hilarious considering the man's name was literally in the company title. How did this happen, you ask? Well, grab your popcorn because this story is better than anything Netflix has put out in the last 5 years. It started back when Gerald made some spectacularly stupid investment decisions that would make a gambling addict look fiscally responsible. The man had thrown company money at every trendy startup that came knocking, convinced he was going to be the next venture capital genius. Blockchain dog walking apps. Subscription services for artisanal air. I'm not making this up. He literally invested in a company that sold premium air from exotic locations in fancy bottles. Like Goop, but somehow even more ridiculous. Naturally, all these brilliant investments tanked harder than the Titanic, and suddenly Kenton Holdings was bleeding money faster than I go through coffee on a Monday morning. The company was circling the drain, making gurgling sounds that accountants have nightmares about. Banks were calling. Creditors were getting aggressive. Gerald was sweating through his expensive suits and probably developing an ulcer the size of Texas. This was around 2017, back when I still had hope that my marriage to Isabel might actually be based on mutual respect instead of her viewing me as some kind of pet rock she kept around for tax purposes. I'd recently sold a software company I'd built from scratch, a little cybersecurity firm that had caught the attention of some major players in Silicon Valley. Nothing too flashy, just a solid piece of technology that solved actual problems instead of being some vaporware nonsense designed to separate venture capitalists from their money. The sale had netted me enough cash to retire comfortably and maybe buy a small yacht, or a large house, or several lifetimes worth of therapy to deal with my in-laws. But I wasn't the retiring type, and I definitely wasn't the yacht type. I was more the let's see how this plays out type, which is probably why I ended up in this mess in the first place. Gerald came to me one night, sweating and desperate, like a guy who just realized the house was on fire and he'd left his pants inside. He pulled me aside at some family dinner, probably one where Isabel had spent 3 hours telling everyone about her latest sales achievement, and asked if we could talk privately. We ended up in his home office, which was decorated like a movie set version of what rich people think rich people's offices should look like. All dark wood and leather chairs, and those weird crystal decanters that no one actually uses, but everyone has. "Miles," he said, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch that probably cost more than my first car, "I need your help." Now, Gerald had never needed my help with anything before. He'd made it pretty clear over the years that he viewed me as roughly equivalent to the furniture, present, occasionally useful, but not worth much conversation. So hearing him admit he needed me was like watching a cat ask a mouse for directions. "What kind of help?" I asked, genuinely curious about what could make a man like Gerald Kenton humble himself enough to ask his underachieving son-in-law for assistance. That's when he laid it all out. The bad investments, the mounting debt, the creditors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Kenton Holdings was in serious trouble, the kind of trouble that ends with bankruptcy proceedings and liquidation sales. He needed a silent investor, someone who could inject enough capital to stabilize the ship while he figured out how to stop it from sinking completely. "I can't go public with this," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "If the board finds out how bad it really is, they'll force me out. If our clients find out, they'll jump ship. I need someone I can trust, family, who can help without making waves." Family. That was rich, considering he'd spent the last few years treating me like I was a stray dog Isabel had brought home. But I'm not petty. Okay, I'm extremely petty, but I'm also a businessman, and I could see an opportunity when it slapped me in the face with a balance sheet. "What are you offering?" I asked. He offered shares. Lots of them. Controlling interest, actually, in exchange for enough cash to pay off the immediate debts and keep the lights on while he restructured. He was desperate enough to give away the kingdom to save it, probably assuming I'd be a passive investor who'd just cash dividend checks and stay out of the way. I accepted, obviously. But here's where it gets interesting. I didn't just become a shareholder. I became the shareholder with majority control of the entire operation. And I did it through a series of holding companies and shell corporations that would make an offshore tax haven look simple. This is where Priya came in. Priya Sharma was my accountant, and calling her just an accountant was like calling Michelangelo some guy who painted. This woman could make money disappear and reappear in different places like she was doing magic tricks with spreadsheets. She had more letters after her name than most people have in their entire name, and she approached tax law the way a chess grandmaster approaches a tournament, with ruthless efficiency and zero mercy. "You want to own this company without anyone knowing you own it?" she asked when I explained the situation. "That's basically my favorite thing to do." She set up a network of holding entities that were so complex they made a Russian nesting doll look straightforward. LLCs owning stakes in other LLCs, trusts holding shares through intermediaries, the whole 9 yards. On paper, if you looked at Kenton Holdings' ownership structure, you'd see a bunch of boring corporate names that meant nothing to anyone. You'd never see my name anywhere near the top of the pyramid. But I was there. Oh, I was definitely there. 77% ownership, with voting rights and everything. I could fire anyone, approve any major decision, veto any strategy one didn't like. I was essentially the puppet master, except instead of strings, I had bylaws and shareholder agreements. And I did all of this while Isabel thought I was working on freelance coding gigs. Every time she asked what I was up to, I'd mutter something about debugging software or optimizing algorithms, and her eyes would glaze over like I'd started speaking ancient Sumerian. She had zero interest in what I actually did, which made the whole secret owner thing remarkably easy to pull off. The best part? Gerald knew I owned the majority stake, but we'd structured the agreement so that he could still run the company day-to-day as long as everything stayed profitable. It was in my best interest to let him do his thing and stay out of the spotlight. I wasn't interested in board meetings or corporate strategy sessions. I just wanted my investment protected and the company stable. All right, let's rewind the tape back to 2017, a glorious year when people were still pretending fidget spinners were a legitimate investment opportunity and everyone thought cryptocurrency was going to replace actual money. It was also the year Gerald Kenton's financial empire came dangerously close to collapsing like a house of cards in a wind tunnel, and I somehow became the secret owner of his entire operation without anyone being the wiser. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I'm sitting in my home office, which was really just the spare bedroom that Isabel had reluctantly let me convert into a workspace after I promised to keep it neat and professional looking in case we had guests. Like anyone was going to give a tour of my office. And here's where Miles pretends to work while I carry this household. I could hear her saying in my head, "My phone rings. Unknown number." Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail because the only people who call from unknown numbers are either scammers trying to tell me my car's extended warranty is expiring or robots who want to discuss my student loans. But something told me to answer this one. "Miles Brooks," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Miles, it's Gerald." His voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel mixed with anxiety. "We need to talk. In person. Today if possible." Now, Gerald Kenton didn't do spontaneous meetings. The man scheduled his bathroom breaks 3 days in advance and probably had a PowerPoint presentation ready for breakfast conversations. So hearing him sound desperate and disorganized was like watching a penguin suddenly sprout wings and fly. Theoretically possible, but deeply unsettling. "Sure," I said, checking my calendar, which was, let's be honest, completely empty. "I can do today. Come to my office. 6 o'clock. And Miles." He paused. "Don't mention this to Isabel." Oh, this was getting interesting. Gerald never kept secrets from his precious daughter. She was his golden child, his protege, the one who could do no wrong even when she did literally everything wrong. If he was cutting her out of the loop, something was seriously broken. I showed up at Kenton Holdings headquarters at exactly 6 o'clock, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, because I'd learned that dressing too formally made people nervous and dressing too casually made them dismissive. The building was one of those modern glass structures that looked like someone had stacked a bunch of transparent boxes on top of each other and called it architecture. Very look how innovative we are, while being completely generic. The receptionist, a young guy named Marcus who always looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else, barely glanced up as I walked past. "Mr. Kenton's expecting you. Top floor." The elevator ride gave me time to wonder what fresh hell I was walking into. Maybe Gerald wanted to borrow money for another one of his brilliant investment schemes. Maybe he was finally going to acknowledge that I existed as a human being rather than just his daughter's questionable life choice. Maybe aliens had landed, and he needed my tech expertise to communicate with them. Okay, probably not that last one. Gerald's office was bigger than my first apartment and decorated like a museum exhibit on excessive wealth through the ages. The mahogany desk probably cost more than a luxury car, and the view overlooked the entire city like he was some kind of corporate god surveying his domain. Except his domain was currently on fire, financially speaking. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from his desk was a woman I'd never seen before, mid-50s, steel gray hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a pantsuit that screamed, "I will destroy you in court and enjoy it." She had a leather briefcase open on her lap and the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Miles, this is Patricia Thornton," Gerald said, gesturing to the woman like he was introducing me to the Grim Reaper. "She's our corporate attorney, and, well, she's going to explain the situation." Patricia looked at me over her glasses with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. Mr. Brooks, Gerald tells me you recently sold a software company for a substantial sum. Define substantial, I said, sitting down in one of the unnecessarily fancy chairs. 7 figures. Maybe 8. Her tone suggested she already knew the exact number, probably down to the cent. Let's say I did all right for myself, I replied, not about to give away information for free. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick enough to kill someone if you threw it hard enough. Kenton Holdings is in financial distress. Severe distress. Mr. Kenton made several high-risk investments over the past 18 months that have failed to generate returns. In fact, they've generated losses. Significant losses. How significant are we talking? I asked, though I was starting to get the picture. $23 million. Gerald's voice came out like a confession at a priest's booth. Give or take. I tried not to choke on my own saliva. 23 million? That wasn't a bad investment. That was a catastrophic failure of judgment on a scale that should come with criminal charges. Jesus, Gerald, I said. What did you invest in? A scheme to sell ice to penguins. Various ventures. Patricia cut in smoothly. Blockchain applications, emerging market funds, several tech startups that promised revolutionary disruption. She said revolutionary disruption, the way most people say horse manure. Let me guess, I said. None of them actually disrupted anything except your bank account. Gerald had the decency to look embarrassed. His face was doing this weird purple-red thing that suggested his blood pressure was probably spelling out SOS in Morse code. I thought I was diversifying our portfolio, positioning us for future growth. Every analyst said tech was the place to be. Every analyst also said Pets.com was going to change the world, I pointed out. Look how that turned out. Patricia clearly liked me, or at least appreciated that I wasn't sugarcoating things. A tiny smile flickered across her face before she went back to being professionally terrifying. The point is, Mr. Brooks, the company is now carrying substantial debt. We've managed to keep it quiet so far, but creditors are getting aggressive. If word gets out, clients will panic, employees will jump ship, and the whole operation will collapse. And you want me to do what exactly? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew where this was going. Save it, Gerald said flatly. I need someone I can trust to inject capital and take on the debt. Someone who won't blab to the board or the press or turn this into a public spectacle. Someone like family, Patricia added, and the way she said it suggested she thought this whole plan was somewhere between questionable and insane. I sat back and pretended to think about it, even though my brain was already doing backflips and calculating possibilities. This was an opportunity gift-wrapped and delivered to my doorstep. Gerald was desperate enough to offer me anything, which meant I could negotiate from a position of strength for possibly the first time in our entire relationship. What's in it for me? I asked. Shares, Gerald said quickly. Substantial equity in the company. We can work out the details, but I'm talking significant ownership stake. How significant? He exchanged a glance with Patricia, who looked like she wanted to object, but knew better. Controlling interest. Majority stake. Enough to make this worth your while. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching Gerald squirm. This man who'd spent years treating me like I was barely qualified to carry his daughter's purse was now offering me control of his life's work. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I want 77%, I said finally. Patricia actually gasped. Gerald turned a shade of purple that probably wasn't medically advisable. 77? Miles, that's more than controlling interest. That's complete ownership. You're right, I agreed cheerfully. It is. But here's the thing, Gerald, you need me more than I need you. I could walk out right now and go buy a beach house in Malibu. You, on the other hand, are about 3 months away from bankruptcy proceedings and having your name become synonymous with corporate failure. So yeah, I want 77%. Take it or leave it. The silence that followed was beautiful. Patricia was looking at me with something approaching respect, and Gerald was doing mental calculations that probably involved selling body parts to avoid this deal. There's one more condition, I added. This stays completely quiet. I don't want my name anywhere near the public ownership records. We structure this through holding companies, trusts, whatever it takes. As far as anyone knows, especially Isabel, I'm still just the guy who does freelance coding. Why? Gerald asked, genuinely confused. I smiled. Let's just say I prefer working behind the scenes. More fun that way. Living with Isabel Kennan was like being trapped in a never-ending infomercial where you're the before picture and she's the miraculous product that fixes everything. Except in this version, the product never stops reminding you how broken you are and how lucky you should feel that it even bothers to be in the same room as you. Let me set the scene of a typical Tuesday evening in the Brooks Kennan household. Yes, she insisted on the hyphenated last name, but only for herself. I was just Brooks, plain and simple, because apparently adding Kenton to my name would somehow dilute her brand or whatever corporate buzzword nonsense she'd picked up from her latest leadership seminar. I'd be sitting on our overpriced couch, the one she'd insisted we buy from some boutique furniture store where the salespeople wore all black and looked at you like you were personally responsible for climate change if you asked about the price, trying to read a book or watch something mindless on TV. Then Isabel would come home from work, and it was like someone had flipped a switch labeled Activate Narcissism Mode. "Babe, you'll never believe what happened today," she'd announce, dropping her designer bag on the counter with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for Broadway productions. She wouldn't wait for me to respond. That would require acknowledging I might have thoughts or opinions worth hearing. I closed the Henderson account. Do you know how long people have been trying to land Henderson? 2 years. 2 years. And I did it in 3 meetings. That's great, honey, I'd say, marking my page and resigning myself to another evening of the Isabel show. Great? Miles, it's phenomenal. It's career-defining. Marcus from sales literally cried when he found out. Actually cried, like tears running down his face. She'd pour herself a glass of wine. Always white, always expensive, always from some vineyard she'd discovered during a team-building retreat that was really just an excuse to day drink in Napa Valley. Meanwhile, what did you do today? Let me guess. Worked on another coding project that'll never actually launch. There it was. The little jab, delivered with a smile and a head tilt that was probably meant to look affectionate, but came across more like a cobra sizing up a mouse. These microaggressions were her specialty, tiny cuts disguised as concern or teasing that were designed to remind me of my place in the household hierarchy. Something like that, I'd reply, because explaining that I'd actually spent the day reviewing quarterly reports from the company she worked for, the company I secretly owned, would have ruined the whole beautiful irony of the situation. "You know what you should do?" she'd continue, settling onto the couch next to me, but somehow making it feel like she was still standing on a pedestal. "You should talk to Daddy about getting a position at Kennan Holdings. I'm sure we could find something for you. Maybe in IT. You're good with computers, right?" The fact that she'd been married to me for 3 years and still reduced my entire professional skill set to good with computers was both insulting and hilarious. It was like describing a brain surgeon as pretty decent with knives. But I learned early on that correcting Isabel was about as productive as teaching a brick wall to do calculus. "I appreciate the offer," I'd say, "but I'm good doing my own thing." "Your own thing." She'd repeat it like I'd just said I was pursuing a career in professional thumb wrestling. "Miles, at some point you need to think about building something substantial. A real career, not just little freelance gigs here and there. Don't you want to be successful?" This was her favorite topic, my apparent lack of ambition and success. Never mind that I'd built and sold a software company that was currently being used by 3 Fortune 500 companies. Never mind that my little freelance gigs had generated enough wealth to fund a small nation's GDP. In Isabel's world, success was measured by how many people you could boss around and whether you had a fancy title on a business card. "I am successful," I'd point out, though I knew it was pointless. "I mean successful like me, babe." She'd pat my leg in that condescending way that made me want to dump her wine on the expensive couch just to watch her freak out. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I just want you to reach your full potential. Not everyone can be a high achiever like me, and that's okay, but you could at least try to do something with your life." The irony was so delicious I could taste it. Here was Isabel, lecturing me about success and ambition, while every dollar of her precious salary technically came from me. The company she worked for? I owned it. The bonuses she bragged about? Funded by my capital injection. The fancy office she loved so much? I could redecorate it as a ball pit if I wanted to. But I never said any of this. Instead, I'd smile and nod and let her believe she was the breadwinner, the successful one, the person carrying our household to greater heights while I coasted along on her coattails like some kind of professional mooch. Dinner conversations were particularly excruciating. Isabel had this habit of turning every meal into a TED Talk about her latest professional triumph. She'd detail every meeting, every email, every strategic decision like she was narrating the director's cut of her own biopic. So then I told the client, she'd say, gesturing with her fork in a way that made me fear for the integrity of our dining room walls, that if they wanted market penetration, and I mean real penetration, not the half-hearted stuff their previous vendor was giving them, they needed to trust our process. And you know what? They ate it up. Signed a 3-year contract on the spot. Market penetration. I'd repeat, trying not to laugh at how seriously she took business jargon that sounded like it came from a corporate Mad Libs game. It's about understanding the landscape, Miles. Positioning yourself as indispensable. Creating value propositions that resonate with stakeholder priorities. She'd look at me expectantly, like she was a teacher waiting for the slow student to grasp basic addition. Do you understand what I'm saying? Every word. I'd lie, sipping my water and wondering if this was what purgatory felt like. Her father wasn't much better. Gerald would call at least twice a week, and every conversation would somehow circle back to Isabel's achievements and my apparent lack thereof. Miles, my boy. He'd boom through the phone speaker because Isabel always put him on speaker whether I wanted her to or not. You should come by the office sometime. See how a real company operates. Might give you some ideas for your little projects. My little projects. Right. The projects that currently kept his company solvent and prevented him from having to explain to his board why he'd bet the farm on a subscription service for artisanal air. The worst part was watching Isabel with her co-workers at company events. I'd get dragged along to happy hours and networking mixers, standing awkwardly by the bar while Isabel held court like some kind of corporate celebrity. Her colleagues would fawn over her, laughing too loud at her mediocre jokes and agreeing with her most basic observations like she'd just discovered gravity. Isabel, that insight about client retention is brilliant. Monica from accounting would gush, her eyes wide with manufactured admiration. Oh, it's just common sense. Isabel would reply with false modesty that fooled absolutely no one. You just have to think strategically about relationship management. Meanwhile, I'd be standing there holding a beer and trying to remember why I'd thought marriage was a good idea in the first place. Sometimes people would acknowledge my existence with awkward small talk that felt like they were fulfilling some kind of social obligation. So, Miles, Trevor from marketing once asked me, nursing his third craft IPA, what's it like being married to such a powerhouse? It's like living with a hurricane, I'd replied honestly. Loud, destructive, and you never know when it's going to hit. He'd laugh like I was joking. I wasn't. But here's the thing about living this bizarre double life. It gave me perspective. While Isabel was busy climbing her ladder and measuring her worth in sales quotas and quarterly bonuses, I was playing a completely different game. She thought life was about titles and recognition and making sure everyone knew how successful you were. I knew life was about leverage, patience, and the beautiful satisfaction of letting people underestimate you right up until the moment you prove them catastrophically wrong. Every condescending comment, every dismissive remark, every time she introduced me as my husband who does tech stuff, I filed it away. Not out of spite, exactly, though let's be honest, spite was definitely a factor. But more because I knew that someday, somehow, all of this would come full circle in the most spectacular way possible. The invitation to Isabel's Top Salesperson Award Celebration dinner came exactly the way you'd expect from someone whose ego required its own zip code, via a group text message that she'd somehow managed to make sound like a royal decree. Dinner this Saturday at Redwood Steakhouse. The message read, complete with champagne bottle emojis and that little celebration popper emoji that people use when they want you to know something exciting is happening whether you care or not. 7 p.m. sharp. Celebrating my latest achievement. Dress code, impressive. Can't wait to celebrate with my favorite people. I was lying on the couch when the text came through, watching some documentary about deep-sea creatures that were somehow less terrifying than my wife's social planning skills. My phone buzzed. I read the message, and I felt my soul try to evacuate my body through my eye sockets. Saturday, I called out to Isabel, who was in the bedroom doing whatever mysterious ritual she did that required 17 different skincare products and cost more than most people's car payments. "Yes, Saturday," she yelled back, her voice muffled by what I assumed was some kind of rejuvenating face mask made from the tears of angels or crushed diamonds or whatever rich people put on their skin. "It's going to be amazing, Miles. Everyone who matters will be there. Everyone who matters." That was Isabel speak for everyone who can witness my greatness and make me feel important. The guest list, which she'd thoughtfully included in a follow-up text because apparently one message wasn't enough, read like a greatest hits album of people I'd rather avoid. Her father Gerald, Monica from accounting who laughed at everything Isabel said like she was auditioning for a sitcom laugh track, Trevor from marketing who clapped at inappropriate times, Bryce from sales who drove a leased BMW and wouldn't shut up about it, and a few other assorted co-workers whose names I could never remember because they all had the same personality, aggressively mediocre with delusions of grandeur. "Do I have to go?" I asked, already knowing the answer but feeling obligated to at least try to escape. Isabel emerged from the bedroom, her face covered in some green substance that made her look like she was auditioning for a swamp monster movie. "Of course you have to go. You're my husband. What would people think if you weren't there? What would people think?" They'd probably think I was the smart one for avoiding this train wreck, but I kept that observation to myself. Right? Wouldn't want people to think things. Exactly. She completely missed my sarcasm, which was pretty much our entire relationship in a nutshell. "And Miles, please try to be engaged, supportive. You know, act like you're interested in what people are saying even if you're not. So basically lie with my face. It's called being social, babe. You should try it sometime." She disappeared back into the bedroom, leaving me alone with my documentary and the growing sense of dread that Saturday was going to be a special kind of hell. The week leading up to the dinner was like watching someone plan a campaign for their own coronation. Isabel spent hours agonizing over what to wear, trying on at least 15 different dresses and asking my opinion on each one, then completely ignoring whatever I said and picking something entirely different. She called the restaurant multiple times to confirm the reservation, change the reservation, add people to the reservation, and probably asked them to spell out, "Isabel is amazing," in rose petals on the table for all I knew. "This is a really big deal, Miles," she said on Friday night, the eve of the big event. We were in bed, and she was scrolling through her phone, probably reading articles about how to be even more insufferable. Top salesperson isn't just an award. It's a statement. It says I'm the best. People respect that. People respect a lot of things. I replied, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was what my life had become, lying in an expensive bed next to someone who viewed human relationships as a competitive sport. Humility, for instance. People seem to respect that. Humility is for people who don't have anything to brag about, she said, completely serious. When you're as successful as me, people expect confidence. They want to see that you know your worth. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd married 3 years ago who'd somehow transformed from someone I thought I loved into a walking LinkedIn profile. "And what's your worth exactly?" "More than most people," she replied without hesitation. "That's what tomorrow's about, Miles. Showing everyone that I've made it, that I'm someone who matters." Saturday arrived with all the enthusiasm of a dental appointment. I spent the morning working out, not because I was particularly fitness obsessed, but because punching a heavy bag was therapeutic when you couldn't punch actual people. Then I showered, shaved, and pulled out the Tom Ford suit that Isabel had insisted I buy for important occasions. The thing had cost $1,200, which felt like highway robbery for something that was essentially fancy fabric sewn together. But Isabel had been adamant. "You need to look the part," she'd said when we bought it. "My husband can't show up to important events looking like he shops at Target." I actually liked Target, but pointing that out would have started an argument that lasted longer than most Marvel movies. So I just handed over my credit card and tried not to think about how many actually useful things I could buy for $1,200. Getting ready for the dinner felt like preparing for battle. I put on the suit, fixed my tie in the mirror, and stared at my reflection wondering when exactly my life had become an elaborate performance piece. Isabel emerged from her 2-hour preparation ritual looking like she was about to walk a red carpet. Hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "How do I look?" she asked, doing a little turn. Like someone who's about to make tonight all about herself, I said honestly. She beamed like I'd just given her the best compliment ever. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm going for. The drive to Redwood Steakhouse was an exercise in patience. Isabel spent the entire 20-minute trip giving me instructions like I was a child about to meet the president. Be supportive, Miles. Smile when people are talking. Try not to look bored. And please don't talk about your coding stuff or whatever it is you do all day. Nobody wants to hear about that. What should I talk about then? I asked, navigating through traffic while she checked her makeup in the visor mirror for the 17th time. Just let me do the talking. You can nod and agree. That's supportive husband behavior. So I'm basically a prop. You're my partner, she corrected, though it sounded exactly like she meant prop. This is my night, Miles. I need you to understand that. Everything tonight is about celebrating my achievement, and I need you to be okay with that. I was more than okay with it, actually. In fact, I was counting on everyone being focused on Isabel, because what I had planned was going to be so much sweeter when delivered in front of her entire fan club. We pulled into the restaurant parking lot, and I could see it through the windows. All gold accents and dim lighting. The kind of place that charged $40 for a steak and called it market price, so you felt too embarrassed to ask how much it actually cost. There were already a few cars I recognized. Gerald's Mercedes, Monica's Lexus, Trevor's Prius that he'd somehow convinced himself was making a difference. Remember, Isabel said as we got out of the car, smoothing down her dress one more time. Be supportive. Be engaged. Be the husband I need you to be tonight. Don't worry, I said, offering her my arm as we walked toward the entrance. I'm going to be exactly the husband you deserve. She smiled, completely missing the difference between what she needed and what she deserved. The hostess greeted us like we were visiting dignitaries, which probably had more to do with the amount of money Isabel had spent on this reservation than any actual importance we held in the world. The table at Redwood Steakhouse looked like it had been designed by someone who thought more is more was a legitimate design philosophy. There were enough wine glasses per person to suggest we were either professional sommeliers or functioning alcoholics. Candles that flickered dramatically like we were in some kind of gothic romance novel, and centerpieces made of flowers I couldn't name, but probably cost more than my first car. Gerald sat at the head of the table naturally, because of course he did. In his mind, every table was his table, every room was his stage. Every conversation was an opportunity to remind everyone that he'd built an empire. Never mind that said empire had been hours away from foreclosure before I'd swooped in like some kind of financial superhero. Monica had positioned herself directly next to Isabel, ready to laugh on cue like a trained seal at SeaWorld. Trevor was already 3 drinks in and looking like he might start clapping at any moment. Bryce was talking loudly about his BMW's new features to anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact with him. And there I was, sitting in my $1,200 suit, sipping champagne that tasted like regret mixed with fermented grapes, watching this circus unfold while everyone pretended they couldn't see the invisible target painted on my back. The dinner started off predictably enough. Appetizers arrived, tiny portions of food artfully arranged on plates the size of frisbees, the kind of pretentious cuisine where you needed a magnifying glass to find what you were supposed to eat. Everyone made appropriate noises of appreciation, because at places like this, you weren't allowed to admit that you were paying $30 for 3 shrimp and a decorative leaf. This is divine, Monica declared, holding up a piece of something that might have been bread or possibly drywall. I couldn't tell. Isabel, you have such excellent taste in restaurants. I know, Isabel replied, not even pretending to be modest. I always know the best places. It's a gift, really. Gerald launched into a story about the first time he'd eaten at Redwood Steakhouse, back in the Stone Age, or whenever he thought the world began recognizing his greatness. Something about closing a major deal and celebrating with cigars that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Everyone listened with rapt attention, or at least did a good job of faking it. I focused on my food, trying to calculate how much longer I had to endure this before I could execute my exit strategy. The thing about patience is that it's both a virtue and a special kind of torture. I'd been patient for years. Patient while Isabel belittled my work. Patient while Gerald treated me like sentient furniture. Patient while everyone in this company assumed I was some kind of unemployed loser riding on my wife's success. Tonight, that patience was finally going to pay dividends. Literally. The main course arrived with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for royal births. Waiters appeared like synchronized swimmers, placing enormous steaks in front of us with the solemnity of priests delivering communion. My steak was cooked perfectly, medium rare, seasoned just right, probably from a cow that had been raised on a diet of classical music and positive affirmations. I'd never admit it out loud, but it was actually incredible. Now this, Gerald announced, cutting into his steak with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. This is what success tastes like. Speaking of success, Isabel said, and I could see her winding up for what was about to be an extended monologue about herself. I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. This award means everything to me. Top salesperson isn't just a title, it's validation. It's proof that hard work, dedication, and raw talent pay off. Trevor started clapping. Monica joined in. Soon the entire table was applauding like Isabel had just announced she'd cured cancer instead of hitting a sales quota that was probably determined by throwing darts at a board. I couldn't have done it without the support of my amazing team, she continued, gesturing around the table like a politician working a crowd. And of course, my family. She looked at Gerald with genuine affection, then turned to me with something that looked more like obligation. And my husband, Miles, who's been so supportive. In his own way. In his own way. Translation. He exists in the same house as me, and occasionally I remember he's there. Bryce, who'd been suspiciously quiet for the last 10 minutes, decided this was his moment to contribute. Isabel, you're an inspiration. Seriously, the way you closed the Henderson account, that was masterclass stuff. Some of us have been in sales for years and never pull off something that smooth. It's all about reading people, Isabel explained, warming to her favorite topic, herself. Understanding what they need before they even know they need it. It's almost instinctual for me at this point. The conversation devolved into what was essentially a corporate worship service, with Isabel as the deity and everyone else as devoted followers. They discussed her techniques, her strategies, her natural gift for sales like she'd been born with some kind of supernatural ability to convince people to sign contracts. I tuned most of it out, focusing instead on my steak and the mental countdown I'd been running since we sat down. Dessert was coming soon. After dessert would come the toast. And after the toast, well, that's when things were going to get interesting. Right on schedule, dessert arrived. Some kind of chocolate situation that probably violated several laws of physics with how rich it was. Isabel barely touched hers, too busy holding court and accepting compliments like she was at her own coronation. Then came the champagne. Real champagne this time, not the questionable stuff from earlier. Bottles of Dom Perignon that the restaurant had probably marked up by about 300% because they knew people at tables like ours weren't going to complain about the price. Gerald insisted on opening the first bottle himself, making a whole production out of it like he was launching a ship. Glasses were filled. Isabel stood up, her face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, looking like someone who'd just conquered a small nation and was about to deliver a victory speech. I want to make a toast, she announced, and the table immediately fell silent because when Isabel Kenton wanted to make a toast, you shut up and listened or you'd hear about it for the next 6 months. To strong women who lift men up by showing them how it's done. The table erupted in laughter. Gerald practically snorted champagne out of his nose. Monica was laughing so hard she had tears running down her face, probably ruining whatever expensive mascara she was wearing. Trevor clapped and laughed simultaneously, which seemed physically difficult, but he managed it. I felt every eye at nearby tables turned toward us, drawn by the commotion. Other diners probably wondering what was so funny, or maybe judging us for being those people. The loud table that thinks the entire restaurant wants to hear their private jokes. Then Isabel turned to me, and I saw it in her eyes. That spark of malicious glee that people get when they're about to publicly humiliate someone and think it's going to be hilarious. So, Miles, she said, her voice carrying across not just our table, but probably to the kitchen staff. Tell everyone, how does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing all day? The laughter intensified. Bryce was practically choking. Monica looked like she might need medical attention. Gerald was shaking his head with this grin that said, "Isn't my daughter just wonderfully bold? Don't be mad. I'm just teasing." Isabel added quickly, reaching over to touch my arm with her free hand, like that somehow made it better. like adding, "Just kidding," after an insult erased the insult. The table leaned in, waiting for my response. They expected me to laugh it off, maybe make some self-deprecating joke about being a kept man, play along with the narrative that Isabel was the successful one and I was just lucky to be in her orbit. Instead, I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a polite smile, but a genuine smile that probably should have warned everyone that something was very wrong. "Teasing is fun," I said casually, my voice calm and steady while my heart was doing victory laps in my chest. "Want to hear mine?" Isabel's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded, probably thinking I was going to make some harmless joke about her shopping habits or her obsession with sales metrics. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Nice thick paper, the kind lawyers use when they want you to know the contents are serious. I slid it across the table toward Isabel, watching her confused expression as she picked it up. "What's this?" she asked, still smiling, but with an edge of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Open it," I suggested, taking a sip of my champagne because might as well enjoy the good stuff while delivering life-changing news. She opened the envelope, pulled out the documents inside, and I watched her face go through about 15 different emotions in 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, horror, and finally landing on something that looked like her soul was trying to evacuate her body through her eye contact. "I own 77% of Kenton Holdings," I said conversationally, like I was discussing the weather or commenting on the quality of the bread. "Which means I own this company. Your company. Your father's company. And effective immediately, Isabel Kenenbrooks, you're fired." You could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. The silence was so complete, so absolute, that I swear even the candles stopped flickering. Every face at the table had frozen in various states of shock, mouths hanging open, eyes wide, champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips. Monica looked like someone had just told her Santa Claus wasn't real. Trevor had finally stopped clapping. Bryce's smug expression had melted off his face like ice cream on hot pavement. And Gerald? Gerald looked like he'd just watched his entire world collapse in slow motion. But Isabel's face, oh, that was the masterpiece. That was years of condescension, years of being treated like I was nothing, years of finding myself purpose and being a high achiever, all crashing down in one spectacular moment of realization. "You," she started, but no other words came out. I stood up, adjusted my $1,200 suit, and smiled at the table. "Thanks for dinner, everyone. The steak was excellent. Really top-notch. 5 stars, would recommend." The thing about dropping a nuclear bomb in the middle of a fancy steakhouse is that the shockwave takes a moment to hit. For about 3 seconds after I announced that I owned the company and Isabel was fired, nobody moved. It was like someone had pressed pause on reality, freezing everyone in this beautiful tableau of shock and horror that I wished I could have captured in a photograph and hung on my wall. Then reality unpaused, and all hell broke loose. Isabel's jaw literally dropped open, so far I was worried it might dislocate. Her face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light. Red, white, purple, back to red. The documents I'd slid across the table were still in her trembling hands, and she was staring at them like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics instead of plain legal English. "You," she stammered, and I'd never heard her stammer before. Isabel was always articulate, always ready with a quick response or a cutting remark. Watching her struggle to form words was like watching a seasoned actor forget their lines on opening night. "You can't. This isn't. What the hell is this?" Gerald snatched the documents out of her hands with enough force that he almost ripped them. His face had gone from its normal ruddy color to something approaching eggplant purple, which probably wasn't great for his blood pressure, but was absolutely fantastic for my entertainment. He scanned the pages, his eyes moving faster and faster like he was hoping the words would change if he read them quickly enough. "This is impossible," he muttered, flipping through page after page of legal documentation that Patricia Thornton had prepared with the kind of thoroughness that made her hourly rate seem almost reasonable. "Miles, you can't just, we had an agreement." "We did have an agreement," I confirmed, still standing because sitting down would have ruined the dramatic effect of my exit. "An agreement where I bought 77% of your company in exchange for saving it from bankruptcy. Remember that? 2017? Tuesday afternoon in your office? You were sweating through a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars." Monica had her hand over her mouth, like she was trying to physically prevent herself from screaming. Trevor had finally stopped clapping, probably a record for him, and was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was actually an alien who'd been studying human behavior. Bryce kept looking between his phone and the documents Gerald was clutching, probably trying to calculate if this was going to affect his BMW lease. But you said, Isabel's voice cracked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of performatively emotional. You told me you were doing freelance coding. You said you were working on small projects. I was working on a project, I replied calmly, enjoying every syllable of this conversation more than I'd enjoyed anything in years. A really big project, actually. It was called secretly owning the company my wife works for while she spends 3 years treating me like an unemployed loser. It was very fulfilling work. Really satisfying. Miles, you can't fire my daughter. Gerald stood up so fast his chair actually tipped over backward, crashing to the floor with a bang that made the entire restaurant turn to look at our table. We were officially that table now, the one providing dinner theater for everyone else's entertainment. This is absurd. Patricia signed off on this. Patricia did more than sign off on it, I said. She structured the entire thing. Brilliant woman, by the way. You should give her a raise. Oh wait, I guess that's my call now, isn't it? A waiter approached nervously, probably wondering if he should call security or just let this soap opera play out naturally. Is everything all right here? Everything's perfect, I assured him. Just a small family discussion about corporate ownership and employment termination. Nothing to worry about. Although I will need a box for the rest of my steak. And the creme brulee, definitely don't want to waste that on bad company. The waiter looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else, but he nodded and scurried away like his life depended on it. Smart man. You bastard, Isabel hissed, and there were actual tears forming in her eyes now. Real tears, not the crocodile tears she could summon on command when she wanted sympathy or attention. You've been lying to me for years. Years. What kind of husband does that? The kind whose wife spends every dinner bragging about her accomplishments while asking what it feels like to watch her succeed while he does nothing, I replied. That kind of husband. The kind who gets introduced as my husband who does tech stuff, like he's some kind of embarrassing hobby you picked up and can't quite figure out how to get rid of. Monica finally found her voice. This is insane. Miles, you can't seriously expect anyone to believe you've been running the company this whole time. I haven't been running it, I corrected. Gerald's been running it, doing a mediocre job, by the way. I've just been owning it. There's a difference. Although now that I'm thinking about it, maybe some operational changes are in order, starting with a complete restructuring of the sales department. Trevor made a sound like a small wounded animal. Bryce had gone pale, probably realizing that his BMW bragging rights might be short-lived if I decided to clean house. Daddy, do something, Isabel pleaded, turning to Gerald with desperation written all over her face. It was weird seeing her like this, stripped of all that confidence and bravado, reduced to asking her father to fix her problems like she was a kid who'd gotten in trouble at school. But Gerald wasn't looking at Isabel. He was looking at me with an expression that combined rage, humiliation, and grudging respect. You planned this, he said slowly. This whole thing. You've been planning this for years. Planning is a strong word, I said. I prefer patiently waiting for the perfect moment. Which, by the way, thank you, Isabel, for providing tonight. That little speech about watching you succeed while I do nothing? Chef's kiss. Couldn't have scripted it better myself. I'll sue you, Isabel threatened, though her voice lacked conviction. I'll take you for everything you have. Divorce, litigation, I'll destroy you. With what money? I asked reasonably. You just got fired, remember? And our prenup, which you insisted on, by the way, because you were so worried I'd try to take advantage of your family's wealth, protects my assets pretty thoroughly. Patricia looked it over. Very airtight. Great work on that, really. The color drained from Isabel's face as she remembered the prenup she'd made me sign before our wedding. The one she presented with such smugness because she was protecting her family's fortune from her underachieving husband. The irony was so beautiful I almost wanted to frame it. This is corporate warfare, Gerald blustered, though he deflated considerably. I'll call an emergency board meeting. We'll fight this. You can't just walk in and... The board answers to the majority shareholder. I interrupted. That's me. I am the board, essentially. Or at least, I control enough votes that your emergency meeting would be very brief and very disappointing for you. I picked up my glass of champagne, drained it, and set it back down on the table with a satisfying clink. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a beautiful evening ahead of me. The city's lovely this time of night. Maybe I'll take a walk, enjoy my newfound corporate authority, think about which other employees have been spending the last few years being insufferable. Miles, wait. Isabel stood up, reaching for my arm. For a second, just a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered every condescending comment, every dismissive remark, every time she'd made me feel small so she could feel big. Don't touch me, I said quietly, pulling my arm away. You wanted to know what it feels like watching you succeed. Now you get to find out what it feels like to watch your world crumble. Enjoy the experience. I hear it builds character. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a table full of people whose entire understanding of reality had just been demolished. The waiter appeared with a bag containing my leftover steak and creme brulee. Bless him. I took it, tipped him $100 because none of this was his fault, and he'd probably just witnessed the most awkward moment of his serving career, and walked out into the night. The cool air hit my face like a blessing. Behind me, through the restaurant windows, I could see our table erupting in chaos. Isabel was crying, Gerald was yelling, Monica looked like she might faint, and Trevor was probably trying to figure out if clapping would help the situation. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. Isabel calling. I declined it. Gerald calling. Declined. Unknown number, probably one of the other dinner guests. Declined. By the time I got home, I had 20 missed calls and a voicemail from Isabel that was equal parts sobbing and rage. I listened to it while eating my leftover steak, which somehow tasted even better cold and accompanied by the sound of consequences finally catching up to 3 years of being treated like garbage. You're a monster. Her voice came through my phone, thick with tears and fury. How could you do this to me? To us? Everything I worked for, everything I built. I deleted the voicemail before she could finish. Everything she built was built on a foundation I'd paid for, with money she didn't know I had, while she'd spent every moment reminding me how little I'd accomplished. The creme brulee was excellent, by the way. 5 stars, would definitely recommend. Waking up the morning after you've publicly humiliated your wife and basically nuked her entire professional identity should probably feel worse than it did. Maybe I was supposed to feel guilty or conflicted, or at least mildly concerned about the emotional devastation I'd caused. Instead, I woke up feeling like I'd just had the best night's sleep in 3 years, which probably said something unflattering about my character, but honestly, I was okay with that. The first sign that my life had fundamentally changed came when I opened my front door to grab the newspaper. Yes, I still got an actual physical newspaper because I'm apparently 80 years old at heart, and found a guy with a camera standing on my lawn like that was a completely normal place for him to be at 7 in the morning. Mr. Brooks, he shouted, raising his camera like he was photographing a celebrity instead of a guy in pajama pants and a college t-shirt that had seen better days. Can you comment on your hostile takeover of Kenton Holdings? Hostile takeover. I called back, shielding my eyes from the morning sun. It wasn't hostile. It was extremely friendly. I smiled the whole time. That's the opposite of hostile. He kept snapping photos like I was about to do something newsworthy instead of just standing there looking confused about why there was a photographer on my lawn. What about your wife? Sources say she's devastated. Sources should mind their own business, I replied, grabbing the newspaper and retreating back inside before he could ask any more questions. Through the window, I could see there were actually 3 photographers now, plus a woman with a microphone who'd appeared from somewhere. They were camped out like paparazzi waiting for a celebrity scandal, which I guess technically this was, just on a much smaller and significantly less glamorous scale. My phone had blown up overnight. Not literally, though given how hot it was getting from all the notifications, spontaneous combustion seemed possible. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, emails from business reporters, LinkedIn requests from people who probably wanted to write exposés about the silent shareholder, which, by the way, was apparently what business blogs were calling me now. I made coffee and opened my laptop, curious to see what the internet had decided about my life choices. The first article I found was on some tech business blog called Silicon Valley Insider or Tech Money Matters, or something equally generic. The headline read, Silent shareholder reveals majority stake in stunning dinner revelation. Stunning dinner revelation. Like I'd announced the second coming of Christ instead of just firing my wife in front of her dad and coworkers. But I had to admit, the article itself was pretty entertaining. Some journalist named Marcus Chun had somehow gotten wind of what happened, probably from one of the dinner guests who'd immediately called every news outlet they could think of and had written this breathless piece about corporate intrigue and hidden ownership structures. Miles Brooks, previously known only as the husband of top salesperson Isabel Kenton, shocked the business community yesterday by revealing he owns 77% of Kenton Holdings. The article began. Sources at the dinner describe a scene of absolute chaos and unprecedented drama when Brooks produced legal documents proving his majority stake in the company. Sources at the dinner. That was a fancy way of saying people who were there and immediately ran to social media to talk about it. I scrolled through the comments section, which was always a mistake, but I couldn't help myself. This is the most savage thing I've ever heard. One comment read, Imagine getting roasted by your own wife and then just casually firing her in front of everyone. Legend. Another comment. If this is real, this guy played the longest game in history. Respect. And my personal favorite. Plot twist of the century. Someone get Netflix on the phone. There were dozens of articles by mid-morning. Who is Miles Brooks, the man behind Kenton Holdings? And from silent partner to majority shareholder. An unlikely story, and how one man secretly owned his wife's company. That last headline made it sound vaguely scandalous, like I'd done something illegal instead of just making a smart investment and keeping my mouth shut about it. The best part was watching Isabel try to control the narrative. She'd posted something on LinkedIn, because of course she had. That was equal parts damage control and delusion. Recent developments in my family life have led to some unexpected changes in my professional situation, she'd written. While I'm no longer with Kenton Holdings, I'm excited to explore new opportunities and challenges. Sometimes change, even when difficult, opens doors we didn't know existed. The post had about 300 comments, most of them variations of what happened and are you okay? And a few schadenfreude-filled ones like karma's a beautiful thing. She was trying to spin getting fired by her secretly wealthy husband as some kind of empowering career transition, which was honestly impressive in its audacity. My phone rang. Patricia Thornton. I answered on the second ring. You've created quite the spectacle, she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. There are reporters outside my office asking about the legal structure of your acquisition. I've had to give my assistant a crash course in saying no comment in 17 different ways. Sorry about that, I said, though I wasn't really sorry at all. Probably should have given you a heads up about the timing. The timing was perfect, actually. Brutal, but perfect. She paused. I assume you're calling about the company restructuring? How'd you know I was going to call? Because you're not the kind of person who fires his wife in public just for revenge. You have a plan. What is it? I like Patricia. She was smart, efficient, and didn't waste time pretending business was anything other than strategic warfare with better suits. I want a clean house, I told her, starting with a new CEO. Someone competent who actually knows how to run a company instead of playing golf and investing in artisanal air businesses. Do you have someone in mind? Tara Lane. There was a pause. Tara Lane from Meridian Solutions? The woman who fired an entire department before her morning coffee. That's the one. She's ruthless, efficient, and she doesn't tolerate incompetence. Exactly what this company needs. She's also expensive, Patricia warned. Her salary requirements are going to be substantial. I own 77% of a multi-million-dollar company, I pointed out. I think I can afford substantial. Patricia made some notes. I could hear her pen scratching across paper. I'll reach out to her people. What about Gerald? What about him? He still owns 23%. He's going to fight you on this. Every change, every decision, every restructuring plan. He's not going to go quietly. Good, I said. I like a challenge. Besides, 23% isn't enough to stop anything. He can fight all he wants. He'll lose. By noon, the photographers outside had multiplied like rabbits. There were at least 6 of them now, plus 2 news vans, and what looked like a college kid with a phone trying to live stream my house for TikTok or whatever platform the youths were using these days. I ordered Thai food for delivery just to watch them get excited when the delivery driver showed up, only to be disappointed when it was just pad Thai instead of me making a statement. The restructuring happened faster than I expected. Tara Lane agreed to a video call that afternoon. She was currently in Singapore doing whatever high-powered executives do in Singapore, probably making other executives cry. She appeared on my laptop screen looking exactly like her reputation suggested. Sharp blazer, sharper expression, hair pulled back in a way that meant business. "Mr. Brooks," she said, no preamble or small talk. "I've been reading about you all morning." Quite the story. "Yeah, it's been a weird 24 hours, I admitted. "I don't do weird," she said flatly. "I do results. Your company is a mess. Bloated departments, redundant positions, an old boys club mentality that should have died in 1987. If I take this position, I'm gutting everything that doesn't work and rebuilding from scratch. Are you prepared for that?" "That's literally exactly what I want." She smiled for the first time, and it was kind of terrifying. "Then we have a deal. Send me the contracts. I'll be there Monday." Gerald tried to call an emergency board meeting, exactly like I'd predicted. It lasted approximately 15 minutes before the board, most of whom were smart enough to recognize which way the wind was blowing, voted in favor of every change I proposed. New CEO, department restructuring, revised compensation structures that rewarded actual merit instead of who played the best golf or who'd been there the longest. By the end of the week, Kenton Holdings looked nothing like it had before. Tara Lane had arrived like a force of nature and immediately started making changes that probably should have been made years ago. The toxic hierarchy that had rewarded yes-men and punished innovation was being dismantled piece by piece. And Isabel? She spent the week posting inspirational quotes on social media about resilience and new beginnings, which I'm pretty sure she copied from a motivational poster at a dentist's office. Finding myself, she captioned one photo of her at a coffee shop, laptop open like she was working on something important instead of probably just scrolling through job listings and crying into her latte. I sent her a text, the first communication we'd had since the dinner. "Google Maps might help with the finding yourself thing. They're really good at locating lost items." She didn't respond, but I like to think she appreciated the suggestion. A week after the media circus began its slow fade into internet obscurity, replaced by some celebrity scandal and a viral video of a cat doing something adorable, I was finally starting to enjoy the peace and quiet of my new life as that guy who publicly fired his wife. It was Tuesday evening. I was on my couch in sweatpants and a t-shirt that advertised a coding conference from 2015, eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like a civilized person, when someone started pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of desperate banging that suggested either an emergency or someone who'd forgotten how doorbells worked. I considered ignoring it. The photographers had finally given up camping outside my place after realizing I wasn't going to give them any more dramatic moments to capture. My lawyer had advised me to lay low and let the dust settle, which was fancy attorney speak for stop doing newsworthy things for 5 minutes. But the pounding continued, and curiosity won out over my desire to finish my Kung Pao chicken in peace. I opened the door, and there stood Isabel. Except this wasn't the polished, perfectly put-together Isabel who'd spent 3 years of our marriage looking like she'd stepped out of a business magazine photo shoot. This was Isabel at her most human, mascara running down her face in dark streaks that made her look like a sad raccoon, hair that had clearly been pulled into a ponytail sometime last week and then forgotten about, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that I was pretty sure used to be mine. "Miles," she said, and her voice cracked immediately. Not the performative crack she'd use when she wanted sympathy from her dad or her coworkers, but a real, genuine break that suggested she'd been crying for approximately 17 hours straight. "Isabel," I replied, still holding my container of Chinese food because I wasn't about to let a dramatic moment ruin my dinner. "You look terrible. Can I come in?" She wiped at her face with her sleeve, making the mascara situation somehow worse. "Please." Every instinct I had screamed at me to say no, to close the door and go back to my Kung Pao chicken and the documentary about World War II submarines I'd been watching. But there was something different about her, something that made her seem less like the woman who'd spent years belittling me and more like an actual human being who was going through something genuinely difficult. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "But if you touch my Chinese food, this conversation is over." She walked in slowly, looking around the apartment like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd lived here with me until about 3 days ago, when she'd moved back in with her parents. Her parents' place, by the way, was a mansion in the suburbs with enough rooms that they could probably forget she was there for days at a time. "I made a mistake," she said, standing in the middle of my living room like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to sit down. "Which one?" I asked, settling back onto the couch with my food. "You've made several recently. Want to be more specific?" "Mocking you. At the dinner. In front of everyone." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't know, Miles. I swear to God, I had no idea you owned the company. If I'd known, you would have what? Been nicer to me? Treated me with respect." I set down my Chinese food, suddenly not hungry anymore. "That's the thing, Isabel. You only would have been different if you'd known I had power. That's not respect. That's just self-preservation." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and tears started flowing again. Real tears, not the calculated ones she could summon when she needed them. "You're right," she whispered. "You're completely right. I was awful to you. For years. I treated you like you were nothing. Less than nothing," I corrected. "You treated me like I was a burden you were forced to carry while you achieved greatness. Like I was dead weight you kept around out of some misguided sense of obligation." "I know." She finally sat down, collapsing into the chair across from me like her legs couldn't support her anymore. "My dad called you furniture once, remember? At that 4th of July barbecue? He said you were like a nice ottoman, present but not particularly useful." And I laughed. I remembered. I'd been standing right there, holding a plate of potato salad, pretending I hadn't heard it while Gerald and Isabel had their little bonding moment at my expense. "That's the thing about pride," I said, leaning back against the couch cushions. "It's blind and loud. Like karaoke at a funeral. You were so busy performing your success, proving to everyone how amazing you were, that you never stopped to think about who you were stepping on to get there." "I'm sorry," she said, and for once in our entire relationship, it sounded genuine. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I destroyed what we had. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. What I became." We sat in silence for a moment. The documentary about submarines was still playing quietly in the background, something about torpedo technology that seemed wildly inappropriate for this conversation. "Are you asking for forgiveness?" I asked finally. She looked up at me, her mascara-stained face vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know if I deserve it." "You probably don't," I agreed. "But that's not really the question, is it? The question is whether I'm ready to forgive you. Are you?" I smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It wasn't the triumphant smile from the restaurant or the satisfied smirk I'd worn all week while watching her world crumble. It was just tired. "Maybe someday, Isabel. But right now, I'm busy doing nothing." She laughed. Weakly, through her tears, but she laughed. And for the first time in our entire relationship, it sounded real. 6 months later, I was standing in a ballroom that probably cost more to rent for one night than most people made in a year, wearing a tuxedo that actually fit properly this time. No thanks to Isabel's fashion advice, obviously, and watching Kenton Holdings' transformation play out in real time like some kind of corporate redemption arc. The charity gala was Tara Lane's idea. Community engagement, she'd called it, which was corporate speak for, let's throw a fancy party, invite rich people, and convince them to donate money to good causes while eating overpriced food and pretending we're all making a difference. But honestly, it was working. The event had raised over $2 million for local education programs, and I hadn't even needed to threaten anyone's employment to make it happen. The company itself had undergone a metamorphosis that would have made a butterfly jealous. Tara had gutted every toxic department, replaced the old guard with people who actually knew what they were doing, and implemented a merit-based system that rewarded competence instead of ass-kissing. Profits were up 23%. Employee satisfaction had skyrocketed. Even the office plants looked healthier, though that might have been because someone finally remembered to water them. Gerald still owned his 23%, and he still showed up to board meetings where he'd grumble about newfangled methods, and back in my day, like he was some kind of corporate fossil. But his complaints carried about as much weight as a protest sign made of cotton candy. The board had seen the numbers, recognized that Tara's leadership was actually working, and basically told Gerald to sit down and enjoy his dividend checks. Isabel had landed on her feet, kind of. She'd gotten a job at a competing firm where she was doing well enough, though I heard through the grapevine. And by grapevine, I mean LinkedIn stalking, which is totally normal and not creepy. that she'd become significantly less insufferable. Apparently, public humiliation and professional devastation had taught her some humility. Character development through catastrophe. You love to see it. We'd signed divorce papers 3 months ago. It was surprisingly civil, probably because the prenup she'd insisted on made everything clean and simple. She got to keep her pride, what was left of it anyway. I got to keep literally everything else. Patricia had called it the smoothest divorce settlement I've ever processed, which felt like an accomplishment worth celebrating. I was nursing a glass of scotch, the good kind, not the stuff that tastes like burning regret, when a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a black dress and an intern badge that identified her as Jessica Chun, marketing. "Mr. Brooks?" she said, her voice carrying that nervous energy of someone who'd psyched themselves up for this conversation and was now committed to seeing it through. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank me?" I raised an eyebrow. "For what? I haven't done anything." She laughed like I'd made a joke instead of stating a fact. "That's not what everyone says. Since you took over and brought in Ms. Lane, the whole culture has changed. People actually want to come to work now. We have mentorship programs and real training, and nobody's getting promoted just because they golf with the right people." "That's all Tara," I said honestly. "She's the one doing the heavy lifting. I just sign checks and show up to events wearing uncomfortable shoes." "But everyone talks about how you turn the company around," Jessica insisted, her eyes bright with that earnest admiration that young professionals have before corporate America beats it out of them. "About how you saw what needed to change and made it happen. What's your secret?" I took a sip of my scotch, considering the question. Around us, the gala continued, people laughing, networking, performing their roles in this elaborate theater of wealth and philanthropy. A string quartet played something classical in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of food that was too fancy to actually be filling. "You want to know the real secret?" I asked, leaning in slightly like I was about to reveal the meaning of life. "Do nothing. Quietly. Long enough for everyone else to underestimate you." She looked confused, like she'd expected some profound business wisdom about synergy and disruption and whatever other buzzwords people threw around in MBA programs. "Do nothing?" "Well, not literally nothing," I clarified. But people confuse noise with productivity. They think if you're not constantly announcing your achievements and making sure everyone knows how busy you are, then you're not accomplishing anything. Meanwhile, the people actually getting stuff done are working quietly, building their positions, waiting for the right moment to make their move. Jessica nodded slowly, processing this. "So it's about patience?" "Patience and letting people show you who they really are," I said. "When you're underestimated, people stop performing for you. They drop the mask. They show their true colors. And that's when you learn everything you need to know about who deserves your trust and who deserves to be fired in front of their entire social circle at an overpriced steakhouse." She laughed again, and I realized she probably thought I was being metaphorical instead of describing my actual life choices. "That's actually really good advice. Thank you, Mr. Brooks." She wandered off to network or whatever interns do at charity galas, leaving me alone with my scotch and my thoughts. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city lights stretching out like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere out there, Isabel was probably at her own company event, performing her role as the reformed career woman who'd learned valuable lessons about humility. Gerald was probably at home, seething about how his son-in-law had outmaneuvered him. Monica and Trevor were likely still working at some other company, clapping and laughing on cue for a different terrible boss. And I was here, no longer the invisible husband, the underestimated plus one, the guy who supposedly did nothing while his wife conquered the corporate world. I was the majority shareholder, the secret architect, the man who'd played the longest game and won. When I walked out of that gala into the cool night air, the city felt different, lighter somehow, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's shadow and into my own light. They'd once laughed at me for doing nothing, mocked me for my lack of ambition, treated me like I was furniture that occasionally needed feeding. Now they worked for the guy who does it best. And honestly, that felt pretty damn good.